there is a specific kind of silence that settles over a room when two people decide to stop pretending. A quietude that is heavier than any argument could ever be, and I learned to recognize it during the months leading up to our wedding. It was not the silence of peace, nor was it the silence of comfort. It was the silence of a contract being honored while the spirit behind it slowly withered. My name is Jasmine, and I am 38 years old, an age where a woman is supposed to have figured out the geometry of her own life, where the angles of career and love and self-preservation should align into something stable and true. But stability is often just a word we use to describe a stagnation we are too afraid to disrupt. I was standing in the center of a penthouse that overlooked the Chicago skyline, a sprawling expanse of glass and steel that belonged to the man I was supposed to marry in 3 weeks, and I was listening to him mock the very institution that was binding us together. Alexander Vance was a billionaire by any metric that mattered, a man who had built an empire on logistics and supply chains, understanding the movement of goods better than the movement of hearts. He stood by the window, a tumbler of scotch in his hand, the ice clinking softly against the crystal, a sound that seemed to mark the seconds ticking down on my patience. He was talking about the wedding, about the arrangements his mother and my father had orchestrated with the precision of a military operation, and he was laughing. It was a dry, humorless sound that scraped against the nerves. He called it a merger, an acquisition of assets, a way to secure the Vance legacy without the inconvenience of emotional entanglement. He looked at me, his eyes dark and guarded, and he told me that he hoped I understood this wasn't a fairy tale. He said it with a smile that didn't reach his eyes, a smile that was meant to wound, to test, to see if I would flinch. I did not flinch. I have never been a woman who flinches when the truth is uncomfortable, because I have learned that discomfort is often the precursor to clarity. I stood there in the soft light of the living room, wearing a simple silk blouse and trousers, my posture relaxed, but my mind racing through the implications of his words. He thought he was being honest. He thought he was protecting himself by lowering my expectations, by framing our union as a business transaction so that neither of us would be disappointed when the romance failed to materialize. But he was wrong about me, and he was wrong about us, and most importantly, he was wrong about the reason I had agreed to this arrangement in the first place. I looked at him, this man who had been my friend for 10 years before the boards and the lawyers and the trust funds got involved, and I felt a surge of something that was not anger, but a profound, aching sadness. He was afraid. That was the truth beneath the mockery. Alexander Vance was terrified of being loved because he believed that love was always a lever used to manipulate him, a currency spent to buy influence over his life. So he mocked the marriage to keep me at a distance, to ensure that if I ever tried to get close, I would hit the wall of his cynicism before I could touch the softness underneath. I told him that I understood the terms. I told him that I was aware of the contractual obligations, the prenuptial agreement that protected his assets, the public relations strategy that would frame us as the power couple of the decade. I spoke calmly, my voice steady, because I knew that if I showed him how much his words hurt, he would only use it as evidence that I was emotionally unstable, another variable he couldn't control. So I gave him what he wanted. I gave him the cold, competent partner he thought he had hired. But inside, I was making a decision. I decided that I would not fight him with words. I would not fight him with demands for affection or assurances of love. I would fight for us with truth, and I would wait for the moment when the truth could no longer be ignored. I walked away from the window that night and went to the guest room, because even though we were engaged, we slept in separate rooms, a boundary he had established early on to maintain professionalism. I lay in the dark and listened to the hum of the city below, the distant sirens, the wind against the glass, and I thought about the history that had brought us to this precipice. We had met in a boardroom, not a coffee shop. I was a strategic consultant hired to streamline his company's operations, and he was the CEO who thought he knew everything about efficiency. We had clashed immediately. I challenged his assumptions about his supply chain. He challenged my understanding of his corporate culture. It was a dance of intellect, a sparring match that lasted for months until we realized that we were more effective together than apart. We became friends first. We shared late nights in the office, ordering takeout while reviewing spreadsheets. We talked about our families, about the pressure of expectations, about the loneliness that comes with success. I saw the man behind the title. I saw the boy who had lost his father too young, who had been forced to grow up too fast, who had learned that trust was a liability. And he saw me. He saw the woman who didn't want anything from him except his respect. He saw the woman who challenged him to be better. And then, the accident happened. His father's will had a clause that neither of us knew about until it was too late. To inherit the controlling share of the company, Alexander had to be married by the age of 40. It was an old-fashioned stipulation, a remnant of a generation that believed stability in the home meant stability in the boardroom. He was 39. He had 1 year. He came to me because he trusted me. He asked me to marry him not because he loved me, he said, but because he knew I wouldn't try to change him. He said it would be easy. He said we could live our lives separately and just show up for the photos. I agreed. I agreed because I loved him. I agreed because I knew that if I said no, he would marry someone who would hurt him, someone who would see his vulnerability as a weakness to be exploited. I agreed because I believed that love could be built, even on a foundation of convenience, if the people building it were willing to do the work. But now, 3 weeks before the wedding, he was mocking the very idea of us. He was pushing me away, testing the strength of the bond, expecting it to snap. And I realized that if I wanted to save this, if I wanted to save him from himself, I had to stop acting like a fiancé and start acting like a partner. I had to stop waiting for him to come to me and start gathering the evidence of what was really happening between us. I needed to understand the root of his resistance. It wasn't just about the contract. It was about something else. There had been whispers in the office, leaks to the press about the merger, suggestions that I was using this marriage to gain access to proprietary information. I had ignored them because I knew my own integrity, but Alexander didn't know that. He heard the whispers. He saw the headlines. And instead of asking me, instead of coming to me with his concerns, he built a wall of sarcasm and called it protection. So I began to observe. I watched him in meetings. I watched how he interacted with his executive assistant, how he spoke to his mother on the phone, how he tensed when someone mentioned my name in a social setting. I noticed that he wasn't just cynical, he was hypervigilant. He was looking for signs of betrayal in every gesture. And then, the incident occurred. It was a Tuesday, 10 days before the wedding. I was meeting with a lawyer, a specialist in trust law, to discuss the implications of the father's will on the company's voting rights. I wanted to ensure that Alexander wasn't being maneuvered into a position where he could be ousted even after the marriage. It was a protective measure. I was working behind the scenes to secure his power, not to steal it. But Alexander saw me leaving the lawyer's office. He saw me getting into a car with a man who was not him. He didn't know who the lawyer was. He didn't know what we were discussing. He only saw the secrecy. He only saw the potential for deception. When I returned to the penthouse that evening, the atmosphere had shifted. The air was colder. He was standing in the kitchen, pouring water, his back to me. He didn't turn around when I entered. He asked me where I had been. I told him I had been handling business. He asked me what kind of business required secrecy. I told him it was regarding the wedding arrangements. It wasn't a lie, technically. The trust law was regarding the wedding conditions, but it was incomplete. I didn't tell him the whole truth because I wanted to see if he would ask for it. I wanted to see if he would give me the benefit of the doubt. He didn't. He turned around then, and his eyes were hard. He told me that he hoped I wasn't trying to renegotiate the terms behind his back. He told me that he had heard rumors about me meeting with competitors. He said it with a casual ease, as if he were commenting on the weather, but the words landed like blows. He was accusing me of betrayal. He was mocking the loyalty I had sworn to him. And in that moment, I felt the guard come down completely. I stopped trying to explain. I stopped trying to defend myself. I realized that explanation was useless when the listener had already decided on the verdict, so I nodded. I told him that I understood his concerns. I told him that I would be more transparent in the future, and I walked away. But that night, I did not sleep. I sat at the desk in the guest room and I opened my laptop. I began to dig. I needed to know where these rumors were coming from. I needed to know who was poisoning his mind against me. I contacted my own sources within the industry. I reached out to the lawyer I had met with and asked him to document our conversation, to create a record of the protective measures we were discussing. I gathered emails, I saved voicemails, I compiled a dossier of truth. But more than that, I gathered my own courage. I realized that this wasn't just about clearing my name. This was about showing him that I was willing to fight for us even when he was fighting against me. I understood then that his mockery was a defense mechanism. He was pushing me away because he was afraid that if he let me in, I would leave. He had been left before. I knew the story. His first serious relationship, years ago, had ended with his partner selling stories to the tabloids. He had been burned. He had built his life around not being burned again. And now, here I was, walking into the fire with him, and he was trying to extinguish the flame before it could touch him. I couldn't blame him for his fear. I could only offer him a reason to overcome it. The days leading up to the wedding passed in a blur of fittings and rehearsals and public appearances. We smiled for the cameras. We held hands for the photos. We played the part of the happy couple while maintaining a silent distance that only we could feel. I wore the armor of professionalism. I answered his questions with precision. I did not volunteer information. I did not seek his approval. I simply existed beside him, steady and unshakable. And I watched him watch me. I saw the confusion in his eyes. He expected me to break. He expected me to cry, to yell, to demand reassurance. When I didn't, when I remained calm and capable, it unsettled him. He began to question his own assumptions. I could see the cracks forming in his cynicism. He would catch me looking at him during a dinner party, and he would look away quickly, unable to hold the gaze. He was searching for the angle, the motive, the trick, and he found nothing. Because there was no trick. There was only me, loving him in the only way I knew how, which was with respect and patience and truth. Then came the day of the wedding. It was held at a private estate in Lake Geneva, a sprawling property surrounded by trees that were just beginning to turn gold with the autumn season. The air was crisp, smelling of fallen leaves and wood smoke. It was a beautiful day, the kind of day that feels like a benediction, but I felt no joy. I felt only purpose. I stood in the bridal suite, looking at myself in the mirror. The dress was elegant, simple, devoid of excessive lace or frills. It was a dress for a woman who knew who she was. My hair was pulled back, my makeup minimal. I looked calm. I looked ready. My mother was there, fussing with the veil, telling me how proud she was, telling me that I was doing the right thing. I smiled at her. I told her that I was, but I knew that the real work was just beginning. The ceremony was outdoors, under a canopy of white silk that fluttered in the breeze. The guests were seated, a mixture of family, board members, and society elites. They were there to witness the merger. They were there to see the deal closed. Alexander stood at the altar. I could see him from where I waited. He looked tall and imposing in his tuxedo, his hands clasped behind his back, his posture rigid. He was not looking at the guests. He was looking at the ground. He was waiting for me to walk down the aisle, and I knew what he was thinking. He was thinking that this was the end of his freedom. He was thinking that I was walking toward him to claim my prize. He was thinking that once the vows were spoken, the trap would be sprung. I took a deep breath. I signaled to the music director. The strings began to play, a slow, swelling melody that resonated in my chest. I began to walk. I walked slowly, deliberately. I looked at the faces in the crowd. I saw the speculation, the judgment, the curiosity. I ignored them all. I kept my eyes on Alexander. As I got closer, I saw the tension in his jaw. I saw the way his eyes scanned me, looking for signs of triumph, of victory. He was waiting for me to look like a conqueror, but I did not look like a conqueror. I looked like a partner. I reached the altar. The officiant began to speak, his voice booming over the speakers, reciting the standard words about honor and obedience and fidelity. I listened, but I was waiting for my cue. I was waiting for the moment when I would be asked to speak. And then it happened. The officiant turned to Alexander. He asked him if he took me to be his wife. Alexander paused. It was a hesitation that lasted only a second, but it felt like an eternity. He looked at me. He opened his mouth to speak. And then he stopped. He looked past me. He looked at the screen that had been set up for the live stream of the event. The screen flickered. A video began to play. It was not part of the program. I had not authorized it. I turned to look. On the screen, there was a recording. It was a recording of the meeting I had had with the lawyer 10 days ago. It was audio only, but the transcript was scrolling beneath it. It was my voice. It was my words. I heard myself saying that I was securing the voting rights. I heard myself saying that I was ensuring Alexander retained control. I heard myself saying that I would never do anything to undermine his position, that I loved him too much to let him lose what his father had built. The crowd gasped. Alexander stared at the screen. He listened to the truth. He heard the protection in my voice. He heard the love that I had hidden behind the professionalism. He heard me saying that I was doing this for him, not for me. The recording ended. The silence that followed was absolute. It was heavier than the silence of the penthouse. It was the silence of a realization crashing down. Alexander turned to me. His face had changed. The hardness was gone. The mockery was gone. In its place was a raw, unguarded vulnerability. He looked at me as if he was seeing me for the first time. He looked at me as if he was seeing the woman who had stood by him when everyone else was trying to take him down. He looked at me as if he was seeing the truth. The officiant stood there, confused, waiting for the response. Alexander didn't speak immediately. He stepped toward me. He broke the protocol. He reached out and took my hands. His hands were shaking. I could feel the tremor in his fingers. He looked into my eyes and he spoke, not to the officiant, but to me. He said that he was wrong. He said that he had been wrong about everything. He said that he had thought I was playing a game, but he realized that I was the only one who wasn't playing. He said that he had mocked the marriage because he was afraid of needing it, because he was afraid of needing me. He said it loud enough for everyone to hear. He said that he loved me. He said it not as a requirement of the contract, but as a confession of the heart. The crowd erupted. There were cheers, there were tears, there was the sound of applause washing over us like a wave. But I didn't hear them. I only heard him. I only felt the warmth of his hands holding mine. I only felt the shift in the atmosphere, the breaking of the wall that had stood between us for so long. I nodded. I told him that I knew. I told him that I had waited for him to see it. I told him that I was still here. And then we spoke the vows. We spoke them with a weight that they had not possessed before. We spoke them as a promise, not as a transaction. When we were pronounced husband and wife, he did not just kiss me. He held me. He held me as if he was afraid I would disappear if he let go. He held me as if I was the only solid thing in a world that had been spinning too fast. We walked back down the aisle together, and this time, we did not walk as business partners. We walked as a couple. The reception was a blur of congratulations and champagne and music. I stood by his side, and he did not leave me to mingle with the investors. He stayed with me. He introduced me not as his wife by contract, but as his partner in life. He spoke to his mother, and I saw him tell her something that made her cry. He spoke to his board members, and I saw them look at me with new respect. The narrative had changed. The story was no longer about a merger. It was about a reconciliation. Later that night, when the guests had gone and the lights were dimmed, we stood on the terrace of the estate, looking out at the lake. The water was dark and still, reflecting the stars above. Alexander stood beside me, holding a glass of water instead of scotch. He looked tired, but he looked peaceful. He turned to me and he apologized. He apologized for the mockery. He apologized for the doubt. He apologized for making me prove my loyalty when he should have trusted it from the start. I listened to him. I did not interrupt. I let him speak until he had said everything he needed to say. And then I told him that I accepted his apology. I told him that I understood why he had done it. I told him that fear makes people do things they regret. I told him that we were past that now. I told him that the contract was signed, but the marriage was just beginning. I told him that I wanted us to build something real, something that didn't need clauses or conditions. He asked me why I hadn't told him about the lawyer sooner. He asked me why I had let him believe the worst. I told him that I wanted him to choose me. I told him that I didn't want him to marry me because he thought he had to. I wanted him to marry me because he wanted to. I told him that I needed to know that when the contract was over, when the obligations were met, he would still be there. He looked at me, and he smiled. It was a real smile this time. It reached his eyes. He told me that I was the most stubborn woman he had ever met. He told me that he loved that about me. He told me that he wasn't going anywhere. We stood there for a long time, watching the water, listening to the night. There was no need for more words. The truth had been spoken. The misunderstanding had been shattered. The wall had come down. I thought about the journey that had brought us here. I thought about the silence of the penthouse, the coldness of the accusations, the fear that had driven us apart. And I thought about the warmth of this moment, the solidity of his hand in mine, the certainty of his voice. I realized that this was what I had been fighting for. Not the title, not the money, not the status. I had been fighting for this. For the chance to be known, for the chance to be trusted. For the chance to love and be loved in return without conditions. It was not easy. It required patience. It required intelligence. It required the strength to hold back when every instinct screamed to defend, but it was worth it, because now we were not just bound by law, we were bound by choice. We were bound by truth. The next morning, we woke up in the same room. It was the first time we had shared a bed as husband and wife. He woke up before me. I felt him watching me. I opened my eyes and saw him smiling. He asked me if I was ready for the honeymoon. I told him I was. He asked me where I wanted to go. I told him it didn't matter as long as we were together. He laughed. He said that was the first time I had ever given him an answer that wasn't strategic. I told him that maybe I was finally relaxing. He told me that he hoped I never relaxed too much. He told me that he liked the challenge. I smiled. I knew that we would still have disagreements. I knew that there would be days when the old fears crept back in. I knew that he would still be cynical sometimes, and I would still be guarded sometimes. But I also knew that we had the tools to fix it. We had the communication. We had the trust. We had the truth. We got out of bed and got ready for the day. We packed our bags. We said goodbye to the staff. We got into the car that would take us to the airport. As we drove away from the estate, I looked out the window. I saw the trees passing by, the sunlight filtering through the leaves. I felt a sense of peace that I had not felt in a long time. I felt whole. I turned to Alexander. He was looking at the road, but he reached over and took my hand. He squeezed it. I squeezed back. We didn't speak. We didn't need to. The silence between us was no longer heavy. It was comfortable. It was the silence of two people who understand each other. I thought about the women who would hear this story. I thought about the women who are in similar situations, who are misunderstood, who are doubted, who are forced to prove their worth. I wanted them to know that anger is not the only response. I wanted them to know that clarity is more powerful than vengeance. I wanted them to know that sometimes, the best way to fight for love is to stand still and let the truth do the work. I wanted them to know that they deserve to be trusted. They deserve to be seen. They deserve to be loved for who they are, not for what they can provide. This story is not just about me and Alexander. It is about the possibility of redemption. It is about the possibility of healing. It is about the possibility of starting over. I know that not every story ends this way. I know that not every misunderstanding can be resolved. But I also know that if we approach our relationships with intelligence and empathy, if we seek to understand before we seek to be understood, we increase the odds. We increase the chance of happiness. And isn't that what we are all looking for? Isn't that what all the contracts and the mergers and the arrangements are trying to secure? A chance at happiness. A chance at connection. A chance at love. As the car merged onto the highway, heading toward the airport, toward the next chapter of our lives, I felt a surge of gratitude. I was grateful for the pain because it taught me patience. I was grateful for the doubt because it taught me clarity. I was grateful for the silence because it taught me to listen. And I was grateful for Alexander because despite his flaws, despite his fears, he chose to listen too. He chose to change. He chose to love. The sun was rising higher now, burning off the morning mist. The road stretched out before us, long and straight and open. There were no obstacles in our way. There were no walls between us. There was only the road and the car and the two of us moving forward together. I closed my eyes for a moment and I breathed in. I breathed in the scent of the leather seats, the scent of his cologne, the scent of the new day. I breathed in the feeling of freedom. I was no longer a consultant. I was no longer a fiancée by contract. I was a wife. I was a partner. I was a woman who had fought for her heart and won. And I knew that no matter what happened next, I would be okay. Because I had myself, and I had him, and we had the truth. That is the only foundation that matters. That is the only structure that can withstand the storms. Everything else is just decoration. Everything else is just noise. The truth is the only thing that remains when the noise fades away. And as we drove toward the sky, toward the clouds, toward the future, I held onto that truth. I held onto it like a lifeline. I held onto it like a promise. I held onto it like love. The journey had been long. The path had been difficult, but we had arrived. We had arrived at the place where we were supposed to be. We had arrived at each other, and that was enough. That was everything. The car continued down the highway, the engine humming softly, a steady rhythm that matched the beating of my heart. I looked at Alexander again. He was singing along to the radio, off-key and unself-conscious. I laughed. He looked at me and grinned. He asked me what was funny. I told him nothing. I told him I was just happy. He told me that he was too. He told me that he never thought he would be here. He told me that he never thought he would be happy. I told him that happiness is not something you find. It is something you build. It is something you choose. He nodded. He said that he was choosing it. He said that he was choosing me. I felt the words settle in my chest, warm and solid. I knew that he meant them. I knew that this was not a momentary impulse. I knew that this was a commitment. We drove on. The landscape changed from trees to fields, from fields to hills. The world was vast and beautiful, and we were part of it. We were part of the story, and the story was just beginning. I thought about the title of our life together. I thought about how people would describe us. They would say we were a power couple. They would say we were a merger. They would say we were an arrangement. But I knew the truth. We were a partnership. We were a team. We were a love story that had been written in the margins of a contract and then expanded into the main text. We were proof that logic and emotion can coexist. We were proof that business and love do not have to be enemies. We were proof that even when the odds are against you, even when the world is cynical, even when the mockery is loud, you can still find your way to the light. You just have to be willing to walk the path. You just have to be willing to wait. You just have to be willing to believe. And I believed in us. I believed in the future. I believed in the power of truth to heal the deepest wounds. The car climbed a hill and the view opened up. We could see for miles. The sky was endless. The horizon was clear. There were no storms on the horizon. There was only sun. I leaned my head against the window. I felt the vibration of the road. I felt the warmth of the sun on my skin. I felt the presence of the man beside me. I felt safe. I felt loved. I felt free. And I knew that no matter where this road took us, we would be okay. Because we had learned the most important lesson of all. We had learned that love is not about having all the answers. It is about asking the right questions. It is about seeking the truth. It is about choosing each other every day, again and again. And we chose each other. We chose each other in the penthouse when I stayed silent. We chose each other in the lawyer's office when I worked in secret. We chose each other at the altar when he spoke his heart. We chose each other in the car when he sang off-key. We chose each other now, and we would choose each other tomorrow. That is the promise, that is the vow, that is the marriage. It is not a piece of paper, it is not a ring, it is a choice. And we made it together. The road stretched on. The sun shone bright, the heart beat steady, and I smiled because I knew that everything was going to be all right. I knew that the best was yet to come. I knew that love had won. And that was all that mattered. That was the only thing that ever mattered. The end of the journey was not the wedding. The end of the journey was not the honeymoon. The end of the journey was a lifetime of choosing truth over anger, clarity over confusion, and love over fear. And I was ready for that journey. I was ready for the long haul. I was ready for the real work, because the real work is not the contract. The real work is the connection, and we had connected. We had connected deeply. We had connected truly. And nothing could break that. Nothing could undo that. We were bound. We were whole. We were one. And as the car disappeared into the distance, leaving the estate behind, leaving the past behind, I knew that we were driving toward a future that was bright and clear and full of promise. I knew that we were driving toward home, and home was not a place. Home was a person. Home was him, and I was home. I was finally home. The silence in the car was comfortable now. It was the silence of understanding. It was the silence of peace. I closed my eyes again. I let the rhythm of the road soothe me. I let the warmth of the moment fill me. I let the love surround me, and I knew that this was it. This was the story. This was the life. This was the love, and it was beautiful. It was perfectly, imperfectly beautiful. and I wouldn't change a thing. Not the pain, not the doubt, not the weight, because it all led to this. It all led to now, it all led to us. And us was enough. Us was everything. The sun continued to rise, the road continued to stretch, the heart continued to beat, and we continued to drive. Together, always together. That was the promise. That was the truth. That was the end of the misunderstanding and the beginning of the marriage. And it was good, it was very good. I opened my eyes one last time before we reached the airport. I looked at Alexander. He was looking at me. He knew I was looking. He didn't look away. He held my gaze. He smiled. I smiled back. We didn't need words. We had said everything that needed to be said. The rest was just living. The rest was just being. The rest was just us. And I was ready. I was so ready. The car pulled into the terminal. The engine stopped. The silence returned, but it was not the silence of the beginning. It was the silence of the threshold. We were standing on the edge of something new, something real, something true. We got out of the car. We took our bags. We walked toward the plane. We walked side by side. We walked as one. And I knew that no matter where we landed, we would land together. We would stand together. We would rise together. That was the vow. That was the promise. That was the love. And it was mine. It was ours. It was everything. I took a deep breath. I stepped onto the plane. I sat down. I looked out the window. The wheels lifted off the ground. We were airborne. We were flying. We were free. And I was happy. I was truly, deeply happy. And I knew that Alexander was too. I could feel it. I could feel the shift in him. I could feel the relief. I could feel the joy. We were flying toward the sun. We were flying toward the future. We were flying toward love. And nothing could stop us. Nothing could bring us down. We were unstoppable. We were unbreakable. We were us. And that was all I needed to know. That was all I needed to feel. That was all I needed to be. Loved, understood, trusted. Home. The clouds passed beneath us. The sky opened above us. The world waited for us. And we were ready. We were so ready. The journey continued. The story continued. The love continued. And I knew it would never end. It would never fade. It would never break. Because it was built on truth, and truth endures, truth lasts, truth remains, and we remained. We remained together. We remained in love. We remained in truth. And that was the resolution. That was the healing. That was the happy ending. And it was real. It was truly real. I closed my eyes. I slept. I dreamed of the future. I dreamed of us. I dreamed of love. And when I woke up, he was there. He was still there. He wasn't going anywhere. He was holding my hand. He was watching me sleep. He was loving me. And I knew that everything was going to be okay. I knew that we were going to be okay. I knew that love had won. And that was the story. That was the whole story. From the mockery to the aisle. From the doubt to the trust. From the silence to the song. It was a story of resolution. It was a story of healing. It was a story of love, and it was mine, and I was grateful. I was so grateful for everything, for everyone, for every moment. For every tear, for every smile, for every truth, for every love. It was enough. It was all enough. And I was full. I was full of love. I was full of life. I was full of hope. And I knew that I would never be empty again, because I had him. Because I had us. Because I had the truth. And the truth sets you free. It truly does. It sets you free to love. It sets you free to live. It sets you free to be, and I was free. I was finally free, and I was flying. Flying toward the sun. Flying toward the light. Flying toward love, and I would never stop. I would never land. I would never fall, because I was held. I was held by love. I was held by truth. I was held by him, and that was enough. That was everything. That was the end, and the beginning of us.